Welcome to Sun, Sand, and Sold. I'm Josh Tomey, as always, with my co-host David Haber. Today, we're having a very special episode, welcoming on the show and here at Miami-Dade County, Mayor Daniella Levine Cava. Mayor, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have a conversation with you and for taking the time with us on the podcast.
Thank you, gentlemen. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're going to get started right away. And David and I have focused a lot over our episode runs talking about issues of mass transportation. And we wanted to start with one, which is really where the county is and where you are going into this new term with mass transit in Miami-Dade County. Where are we going with mass transit and how are we making it more accessible and expanding its service?
Yes. Well, number one, traffic cannot be solved with highways. We have to solve it with transit.
I agree with
and
that.
we've been working really hard. I have to say, look, I'm a transit rider since childhood. I grew up in New York City. I rode the subway every which way, starting at a rather young age. And we have here, of course, an extensive bus network and a metro rail spine. But we had not redone the bus routes for 40 years. So it was really antiquated as a system, didn't have the frequency or the hours that were needed. And we undertook a massive redesign called the Better Bus Network. We did it in conjunction with community groups. A group called the Transit Alliance was really an early instigator for the change. And we also have the Citizens Independent Transportation Trust, which oversees the half-penny use. And so a lot of advocacy that went into it, a lot of community conversations, really that took place prior to COVID, which was really interesting.
Is that those bus lanes that we see on like 836? And
Not really. So that is part of the overall solution too. So just the redesign of the actual bus routes, they go the places that more people need to go more frequently, and has led to an increase in transit ridership. Up like 10% over pre-pandemic levels, which is something that other cities have not seen. So people really have gotten the message. We've got more frequency, longer hours, later hours, weekends, more frequented routes. So that's convenient for people, more reliable. The lanes, the dedicated bus lanes, is also a really great innovation. So you certainly see them on 836. We have them on the South-Dade Transitway, and we're going to have the brand new bus rapid transit system. That's the longest electric bus rapid transit system in the world.
Oh, wow.
Where's that going to go?
It's from Dadeland to Florida City.
Wow.
So that is going to really create some greater connectivity. And even when I was a county commissioner and I served the southern end of the county, I lobbied for more frequent express buses on, we called it the busway at the time. Right. We changed it to transitway in anticipation of new and improved mobility modalities. But the express bus, for example, from Cutler Bay to 11th Street, has generated huge traffic. You can get very quickly on an express bus to Dadeland, maybe 20 minutes from there. Whereas if you're driving a car, you're going to be sitting in traffic. You're going to be waiting at all those traffic lights. Now we have signal prioritization. So those buses are going to fly through those intersections and really cut travel time significantly. And then on 836, that dedicated bus lane goes to two locations now. One is the Dolphin Park and Ride by the Dolphin Mall, and the other is the Tamiami Park and Ride, which is west of FIU campus. Those are also so popular, they've had to add additional service. Those buses are going full. Again, you can save like 20 minutes on your downtown commute. You could sit and look at your internet and emails and so on. It's really a great feature, and people are using it.
What are we going to do about creating more, I don't want to say metro rail or metro mover, but what are we going to do about whether it goes, up I-95, out 836, down to the Turnpike, to Florida City? How are we going to get funding for that? Because my understanding is that even if you get the capital funds from the federal government, you have to prove to them that operationally you can sustain it before they'll give you the money to build it. Something like that, right?
Well, a little history lesson here. First of all, we were a sleepy town. We were largely suburban. We grew exponentially. World-class cities have world-class transit, so commitments were made. And the half penny came in with a false promise. it was designed, the programs that were designed and shared with the public would have cost a full penny, but polling suggested a full penny wouldn't pass. So they changed it to half penny and didn't really educate the community that they would get a half a loaf. So this has created just a huge problem of trust, lack of trust, broken promises. And so it was promised that the Metro Rail would extend to Florida City, that it would extend west, it would extend north. And of course, none of those things have come to pass. The North Corridor, which would go up 27th Avenue, is slated to be a continuation of Metro Rail. We have not secured the funding for that yet, but the right-of-way is in process. The design is there. Studies are being completed. So we're hopeful that in this new administration, and like you say, you have to show not only that you can sustain it, because you can't just build it if you can't operate it, but you have to show that the ridership is there to justify the federal investment. And so we, for example, on the South Corridor, went with the bus rapid transit request to the federal government because we did not yet have the ridership. I personally thought we should have given it a go and tried to get the money for the Metro Rail, but that was not what was passed at the time by the Transportation Planning Organization and the Board of County Commissioners when I was a commissioner. And truthfully, we so-called rated high for bus rapid transit, and we were able to get the money, and it will be opening this year.
Right.
So that's exciting. And even though it's not a train, it's train-like. It's elevated. It's level boarding, it's air-conditioned stations, it's prepaid fare. So the loading, which takes a lot of time, is expedited. That's part of what makes the ride really fast. So we are expecting in the future to run the extension of Metro Rail North. The Northeast Corridor, otherwise known as the Brightline Corridor, as well, is moving forward. It's actually in the proposed federal budget.
Is that for the Aventura Station?
Well, Aventura Station already exists, right? We already funded that, and the rail line already exists. What didn't exist are the other stations and the trains that we need. The rolling stock is what they call it. So Brightline doesn't want to operate it. It's the trains they have are really for longer distance, and they really didn't want to be in the commuter rail business necessarily. So we don't know. Likely it could be Tri-Rail that will come in on those tracks. And we do have substantial federal and state monies dedicated already. You know, gotta get the check in the mail, but dedicated already.
It's coming, I swear.
It's coming, yeah. And with the stations that have been determined, and the stations are actually public-private partnerships, like at Sole Mia, they're putting in, et cetera. So, various of the stations are not at full county expense. There's a private sector.
Right, which is great. And obviously from a development standpoint, that kind of private-public sector cooperation is fantastic.
It's fantastic, and it's generating economic development when you have a station, right? So it's also called transit-oriented development. The properties along the line shoot up. People want to live there. They want to have their shops and businesses there. So we see it already on South Dade Corridor. This was a really interesting phenomenon. We upzoned along the corridors. There's something that the county did called the Rapid Transit Zone that allowed for more density along the corridor. And even before the bus rapid transit before you could see it, they were building along that corridor in anticipation of increased economic activity.
If you look, even on the Metro Rail corridor going down near Bird Road, next to that station, they've built these apartment buildings and the like.
It's right.
And they weren't there 10 years ago, but now people are living right next to the station. And they have shops there. They have grocery stores there.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if they have to go downtown, or to Dadeland, they can get there.
And a lot of people, not just young people, right? Not just people who come from big cities where they're used to transit, not just young people that maybe don't want to be car dependent, but even some older folks like me, they like not having to worry about the car, and they want to live in proximity to shopping and restaurants and other venues. And these are very popular. And so also we give them zoning with fewer required parking spaces. So that also brings down the cost of development.
Yeah, and it also brings in people who don't have a car or don't need a car because they're buying in or renting in knowing that there's no parking space for them.
Exactly. There's limited parking.
Which is an incentive for them to use mass transit.
You got it.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like that's part of the hurdle is, when I came from Boston, you guys are from New York. Growing up on public transportation was just a regard. It's what you did. And it seems like that's the adoption that we want, is to have everybody look at this as a universally accessible system.
We started the new bus system with a free fare period to get people to try it. You'll like it. And I think that was successful. And also the traffic has gotten really unbearable in many times
outrageous
a day.
Is the word I would use.
And so people...
Challenging.
Challenging. I like that. Challenging. So it's led more people to try it. And truthfully, the bus network is very extensive. And with the increased range and more frequency, it's more desirable, It's not perfect. We have to recruit operators. We're still hiring. Anybody listening wants to be a bus operator, we have hiring incentives. We pay for your training and everything else. I've had friends that I've recruited to be bus operators. They love it. And, we want to really have a great system.
Josh, would you trust me behind the wheel of a bus?
Not a chance at all, but that's okay. That I also have inside information. I know David wants to. I'm going to tee him up a little bit because and one of the things that public transportation for us segues into is how we're getting workers into these dense urban core areas of Miami-Dade County, creating sustainability. And David, that's been a hot topic for you. We've talked about it in almost every episode is how do we accommodate workers in a way that's meaningful and sustainable?
I mean, we're building massive high rises now. Brickell, Edgewater, Sunny Isles, 50 stories is now not tall, which is crazy when you and I grew up here and when we moved here. The highest building was One Biscayne Tower, which was, 33 stories. And we thought it was the highest, super high. And now they're going to build a 100-story tower. And so my question is, you have to have workers there. Presumably the luxury high rise, which is not stopping. People keep coming. Miami is a hot destination. I've heard George Perez talk about the fact that if you want to be an international city, you have to have mass transit. I think you agree with him. I know we agree with him. But then you got the question of, unless you create live local and people affordable housing, and I'm sure you've heard of what Mayor Weinberg is doing up in Aventura with the Heroes housing.
The Hero housing, yeah.
How do we get people to Brickell? How do we get them to Edgewater? These people don't have the money or the time to spend an hour and a half. I don't know what we do unless we find places close to where they work. I think that's another part of this that we haven't resolved. What's your thought in that regard?
Well, first of all, it sounds like you should run for mayor or something.
No, I am not running for mayor. You're my friend, my colleague as a lawyer, and I can tell you that you have done an amazing job. And I said this before the broadcast. I've known you for over 35 years. You're doing an incredible job, and we're very proud of you. And we do appreciate that you've come on to field what I consider to be very difficult questions to which there are no simple answers.
Yes. So these are the things I grapple with. First of all, my entire career has been dedicated to uplifting people who want to be in the middle class, who are in and want to stay in the middle class. That's been my focus. And this is one of the most, if not the most expensive place to live in the country based on the salaries relative to the cost. So our increase in cost of living is the highest. It's just really abysmal. And we have lost people because they can't find a decent place to live within their means. And we've had difficulties attracting people as well. And of course, a big part of the skyrocketing housing costs are because of the relocation. Post-pandemic or during the pandemic, people discovered our paradise. They came down with higher salaries, with more disposable income, and they priced us out of the market. So the only solution, it's simple economics, is more supply. So we have been on the supply issue aggressively. I've more than doubled the annual amount of our budget towards development of affordable and workforce housing. We've brought down state funding, federal funding. We've partnered with private sector. We have county land that we're dedicating exclusively to housing.
That's fantastic.
And,
let me tell you, that's a big one.
It is.
Because if you don't have the land,
is the biggest cost.
I mean, if you don't have the land, you can't build anything.
That's right. And so in the marketplace, free marketplace, they're building luxury because it, as they say, doesn't pencil out to do anything else.
Right.
By the time you buy the land and you do the construction costs and everything, it's they can't
construction
afford.
costs have skyrocketed in South Florida.
Construction insurance. I mean, just to get,
and
just
the
to get
insurance, all
insurance.
of that. So what we've done is we've done everything. So utilize the existing county land. We're partnering with our school system for their land, looking at other public lands that can be redeployed. We also densified, right? We've given zoning by right along these transit corridors. You can build higher, you can build smaller. We've
so the county's working with private developers and
constantly
public-private partnership in order to make it pencil out and work for them.
Exactly.
Because if it doesn't work for them,
Yes.
they're not going to build it.
Correct. And then we are also redeveloping. We have a program called NOAA, Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing, where we actually give grants. It's not even a loan to smaller landlords with small buildings and say, here, don't knock it down and build luxury. We will give you money to fix up this property and maintain it as affordable for 30 years.
Right.
And that's available. We're marketing that. We also petitioned the federal government for more Section 8 vouchers, which allow people, and talking middle class people too, to not pay more than a third of their income on housing. And we also got 7,500 additional public housing slots. When I came in as mayor, there were a lot of dilapidated public housing units that were not being used. They were just waiting for some kind of redevelopment. And I tasked my new housing director, fix them up. And so we've moved people in. We're also, we have a homeless crisis too, right? And homeless are many of them working and their salaries don't support being able to provide for housing. So we have dedicated a certain number of those public housing units to people who were homeless to assist them. And we've also purchased, the Homeless Trust has purchased hotels, apartment dwellings. They're looking at buying these tiny homes and dedicated land, which we've identified. We have 1,000 people still homeless officially, which is very low
Super
per capita.
Low. You
right?
look at San Francisco and you can't. You're walking over bodies.
Yes,
It's crazy.
We have a very, very successful program because we have a dedicated source of revenue,
Right.
the bed tax and so tourism, as much as anything, does pay for those things, which is great. But we needed to have the supply.
Right.
So we have been extremely aggressive. I will tell you, I went to another ribbon cutting this morning of a project. We have gotten so much federal support, state support, preventing evictions. We have an eviction diversion program. We created an Office of Housing Advocacy. I don't think there's any place in the country that has been more creative than we have been on addressing the housing issue. Have we solved it? No, we have not. But prices are stabilizing. I heard yesterday from my housing director that in the rental market, it's kind of softening and they're starting to, so they're starting to give free month, first month free or
My
waive
kids
the
will be
security.
happy to hear that.
Yeah, they're really recognizing those things and eventually they might reduce the rent. I heard in Austin, Texas, rents are coming down. Home prices are coming down just a little bit. Condo prices, we do expect them to come down. So many challenges, the older condos, which, by the way, we created a program to make sure people didn't lose their condominiums. So up to 140% area median income. So like 120,000 or something along those lines for, let's say, a couple. They can, if they make that, we can give them a zero.
I was going to ask you about the zero interest loan up to $50,000.
Exactly.
Right, for the special assessments.
That's right. Yeah. Special assessments. And that has been very popular. That's very innovative because where are those people going to go? Well, we don't want them to lose those units.
Right.
Well, the truth of the matter is, and I've said this, we're going to continue to have terminations on huge oceanfront and bayfront properties with huge, they have these big parking decks and pool decks. The width of those properties is
Yeah.
actually to the point where it doesn't even make economic sense for some of them, and they can't do it for even $50,000. Some of them is even more. I guess the question is, with respect to, Live Local, how are you doing in your negotiations with, for example, the city of Miami? And I don't want you to talk about anything you can't talk about, but some of these cities are not thrilled with the Live Local, and some developers are trying to take advantage of it. I know the Clevelander in particular is a big issue, and I know in Bal Harbour, the owners of Bal Harbour shops want to build there. I don't know that that's what Live Local was all about, and so how do we tweak this to work?
So Live Local is a state piece of legislation, not local, and I would say that there was a problem of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And so a lot of the cities were not really doing their part.
Never heard NIMBYism, but it sounds interesting.
Yes, there's a lot of it. People don't want it here,
right.
Someplace else.
Right.
So, it has been effective in allowing by right housing to be built if it has a certain percentage that's available for low and moderate income. But sometimes it's in a place that's really incongruent with the neighborhood, and that's where people are very upset. And also, it allows them to waive all the impact fees. Now, if you're going to build, you got to bring water, you got to bring sewer, you got to build some roads. And, a smaller jurisdiction doesn't have money in the bank to subsidize a project to that extent. So, for us in the county, it isn't as big a problem. We have a bigger budget. And we haven't really had any projects that have been problematic in the county. The cities have struggled a bit more. We have lobbied for some modifications of the law to make sure that you wouldn't have a big building looking down into somebody's single family house, that sort of a thing, or you wouldn't tear down a historic building in favor. We need to keep local character too.
Right.
But we've done a lot of things locally to incentivize, and that was a state solution.
I really like the idea of what they did next to Bird Road, where they built right next to a station, and they created a little community.
But that's not Live Local.
No,
that was county policy.
Right.
Yeah. And is the county going to continue to do that
Absolutely.
as we build up 27th Avenue, and if we ever go to Florida City going that way?
Well, it makes total sense. Like you said, you don't need a car if you have access to good transit. And that's the logical place to build higher.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a win-win.
And it's working there.
It is working.
Yeah, and I think on the subject of location, it strikes me, Mayor, that in the last couple of your answers, there's a lot of diversity built into what sounds like the county's approaches right now, which is to say it's not going to be one program that's going to fix it all. It's going to be a lot of programs. And even the diversity of the type of housing, to say we don't want all high rise. We need some diversity within the offerings itself for all sorts of reasons. Is that intentional, or is that a byproduct of dealing with such a challenging housing environment of saying we're going to have to take on a lot of different programs in order to solve this from multiple angles?
Well, we don't have a Band-Aid solution. We don't have a one-size-fits-all. We have lots of different funding sources, and diversity is good. We don't want to have just blocks of monolithic type structures. That's not attractive. But we happen
to have great architecture in this.
Yes, architecture.
I do want to say we have great architecture being built, which is really exciting.
And that's part of what makes us a great destination, right? Not just the weather, not just the fact that you can be outside all year long, although today was chilly. It was really
a welcome change.
It's because of our diversity. People love it. It's unique. It's individually all different cultures and styles and all that.
We are a melting pot for sure.
Well, we call this a salad rather than a melting pot. Think about that. Because in the salad, you don't lose the tomato or the onion or the cucumber. It doesn't become like a gazpacho.
It's not homogenized.
We also save calories with salad.
There you go.
More nutrition tips after the break, folks.
And I need the salad, trust me.
Well, I did want to say that I am a strong proponent of mixed income communities. So the concentration of poverty has been bad for society. It means, ghettoizing, whereas what you really want is for there to be a mix in any community. There's people that do certain kinds of jobs, other kinds of jobs, amenities where people can associate, that's, by the way, one of the assets of public transit. Transit is a place where you're all together riding transit. And neighborhood should be the same, where you're not really isolated or creating ghettos.
Right.
So I think part of what we do when we build with more diversity is we build to different income levels in one community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. On that note, and this is a topic that we also visit very frequently in the wake of the Surfside tragedy, as we look at development and redevelopment. How has the county taken position around a lot of the new state legislation in terms of the impact we know it's having? Obviously, we just talked about the no interest loan on special assessments, which is a huge program. What are the other aspects of the county taking position on behalf of residents in dealing with these new laws that we read about every day in the headlines?
And the laws are changing every year.
The unaffordability of condos, its impact on rentals. We know there's a lot of rentals within condos, and we know that it's such a huge piece of the economy. Does the county take a specific stance on that, or is your office more focused on the outcome and then having to deliver on programs based on that outcome?
First of all, we're very active in lobbying at the state legislature. And we have a great lobbying team, and we have staff as well as consulting lobbyist firms that we hire. We travel up to Tallahassee and Washington. I do personally, commissioners do as well. We have a lot of expertise. We provide guidance on legislation. So we're very active in that regard. As far as the specific building code issues, I was reminded today, I was talking to our director of the Division of Emergency Management for the state of Florida, that Florida is the leader in the country on zoning building requirements for safety. Mm-hmm. And it really started in Miami-Dade. Florida adopted our building code to a large extent after Hurricane Andrew, and then we're a model for the nation. So here we are again. The building fell in Surfside. Of course, you know I was there every single day,
yes,
early to late. Force. I was there. And we already had significant building protections, but, obviously we had never anticipated this particular tragedy. We got to work with what we could do. We created a registry of all of the multi-tenant buildings by law required with a registration fee where the budgets are disclosed, the safety reports, the board membership is disclosed. It used to be hard to get that information.
There was no centralized data source for that.
You couldn't even get it not centralized. You could not get it. Like if you were trying to buy a condo, you could not get it. You had to be there. And anyway, very, very hard, not transparent. So that changed. And then the state did something similar, but not as far reaching. And so we've been held up as a model. And then really a lot of what they did was copy what we already had. Right. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
A little more frequent and closer to the shore, the coast, a little more frequent.
I believe that the people in charge of cities and county, code enforcement went out and checked all these buildings.
Which
was that was a big undertaking.
Well, within the first week, we said, okay, we know we have...
The building director said, you go check them all.
Correct. That's what we did. Well, I said, let's check them all.
Okay.
So
it
comes from the top down.
Right. I mean, you told the building director told the inspectors.
Yes, and they did it.
And they did it.
Well, we wanted to be sure, doubly sure. And actually, very interestingly, we didn't shut down any buildings as a result of that inspection. There was one balcony in one building that it turns out was maybe a little...
There was a little bit of a collective sigh of relief. I remember when that was taking place and saying, I wonder what's really going to be found here.
But here's the trick. It's a countywide ordinance that applies to all the cities, but it's implemented by the cities.
Right.
So in Surfside, they were following the county law, but our inspectors were not responsible. Okay. It was theirs. And so there might be some issue about exactly what was known about this particular building.
Right.
And we know there was some latitude that was given, like, okay, you say there's a problem here, but you need a little more time. You don't have the money yet. And we know people were not taking it seriously to put that money into reserves.
Well, I can tell you that as a condo attorney, I've heard of many buildings where not only did they waive reserves, which of course was kicking the can down the road for 30 years, and someone I call it, in all the podcasts, I talk about it as musical chairs. Everybody's walking around, but the last person who doesn't have a seat is the one who's paying down the line. But in addition to not funding reserves, they had a lot of problems with, as you say, transparency. They had 40 and 50-year certifications, and they were 4 and 5 years late, some in 6 and 7 years late to get these things done.
Yes, so certainly now we are not going to be able to kick the can down the road.
Right.
Yeah.
But
of course, the sharp cutoff is very problematic too, because we have condo vultures that are ready to swoop in and convert. And if they have the whatever requisite number of people that agree to sell, now these other people are out. I have a friend whose building was trying to decide whether they would put in hurricane shutters or hurricane windows. Obviously, the windows being much, much more expensive. And that decision was made without really full disclosure or discussion. And that would be driving out people who could not afford to do that.
Right.
So those are some of the things that we really need to be thoughtful about.
And I think your database, is really interesting to me. There was a series of stories about a particular condo in Brickell that had passed a huge special assessment, and there was a big uproar about it. And, I saw in the media that there was a real lack of conversation about the database and saying, those are the kind of things that the database was intended to be for, is to say, even within your own condo. I mean, listen, you can make the argument to say, I missed a board meeting, I did this, I did that, and there's this requirement. And it seems like as that gets better culturalized, that people can start to use that more as a resource rather than just a safety net.
That would be great. And an educational tool.
Right.
And then, public pressure. Things don't happen until, unfortunately, bad things happen, and it leads to a good thing happening. So challenges create opportunities, and now people are more aware. And it's going to take a little while to sort it all out, but I think in the end, we're all going to be safer.
What do you think about Mayor Weinberg's Heroes Housing for police officers and teachers? Do you think that's something that the county would undertake in unincorporated Dade, something like that? Because quite frankly, you don't want teachers and firefighters or police officers, living far away.
Right. Well, our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers, they are, the missing middle, right? Their salaries are, they don't qualify maybe for some of the public benefits programs, but nor can they afford to live here. And that is a huge detriment to all of us. So we have, through our programming, even set aside units that are for, in one case, the state attorney and public defender near the courthouse. So that was a dedicated block of housing to make sure that, because their salaries are not competitive. Right. And then, we don't have our prosecutors. What they did in Aventura, and hats off to the mayor there, who's a good friend, they decided to put money in to subsidize it, and they got a sponsor.
Yes, they did get a sponsor, and they worked with Related. I think they said that they were donating land as well, and they were getting something back,
or lifting a restriction on some of the
so they got some return for doing that.
And, again, it's that public-private, it's horse trading. But if you want to get something done, the numbers have to make sense, or the private groups aren't going to do it.
I can assure you that the housing that we're cutting the ribbons on and groundbreaking every single day, because we've already got 2,000 new units completed in the last, couple of years, and 8,000 in the pipeline now. These are all going to people who fit in that category. We had something called the Homes Program. It had a variety of programs, and one was specifically to subsidize middle income rental. But the amount of money that we needed to give the landlord to incentivize them to bring down the price is really not sustainable for us. Sure. Yeah, when you're talking about the population that we have. So looking for individuals, that's why it's not one size fits all. If a hospital wants to subsidize their employees, if a school in Doral, the Doral charter school, they subsidize housing for their employees.
Right.
You know, so everybody needs to step up.
So everybody has to kick in and work together to make this work.
Well, there is a takes a village mentality that I think sometimes doesn't cross our minds with development, but the reality is to make it sustainable, it probably has to be that.
Yes.
On that note, in terms of future development, obviously they're not making any more land. And an issue that comes up frequently is discussion of pushing further west, whether it's up against or beyond the urban development boundary. Do you have a position on that? Is that in terms of that kind of development, or more rehabilitation of the existing developments that we have, or the existing land that we have to make that work?
Yes. So I have a very public position opposing overdevelopment in our open areas. And that is part of what all we've been talking about, the densification along the corridors, the repurposing of infill housing. We also have a law that allows people to build a second home on a larger piece of property. So what used to be called a grandma's grandparents' cottage or something. So it used to be under the radar.
Now it's going to be for the kids.
Parent subsidized. It's a very different rate.
Not in my backyard.
The Haber affordable housing.
Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
Sorry, kids.
Well, it's a really good way to utilize underutilized space. We're not living in suburbia for the most part now. Right. So there are areas that have the property and have the capacity to house another little dwelling unit. And so we've made it easier by right. You don't have to go to a zoning change to do that. That's been somewhat controversial in the neighborhoods where people don't want higher densification. Right. So, there's some pressure points there. But once you start building further out, you don't have the roads, you don't have the water sewer, you don't have the traffic signals, you don't have the schools, you just don't have the infrastructure. And so it's really sprawl, and it only increases traffic.
It's funny because if you go down the turnpike, it used to be Manny Diaz Farms all along both sides, and he had his tree farms.
Yeah.
And now it's all new developments up and down the turnpike.
It's a huge, huge pressure point, and we have to come up with alternatives because people do want to live here and we're not keeping them out, but they have to get used to new models. Maybe it's a townhome instead of a picket fence, And then the other big issue is our open spaces are incredibly important from an environmental perspective as well as our agricultural industry.
Yeah, we need the redlands to stay the redlands.
We do. We are still growing things. We're breadbasket for the nation. We produce 4 crops per year of green beans. I'm all about these green beans and
I know.
all the rest.
I have represented people in the redlands, and they absolutely produce all kinds of
I think it's a national security issue. I discussed it with one of our former secretaries of agriculture. We don't want to be dependent upon foreign countries in this atmosphere. We want to be able to produce food. So that's one thing. But also it's our water supply. I just want to underscore this. This is like number one issue. Our water comes from the Everglades. Everglades water flows under the surface and is purified and comes and flows into the bay, which needs fresh water. Without that fresh water, the bay is polluted. The fish die. Our economy goes down the toilet, literally.
Right.
So it's a matter of protecting our freshwater supply, our bay, and to the extent that we pave over paradise, we're doing it at our peril.
So how do we incentivize developers to, I guess the word is gentrify the areas that need to be upgraded within the city in order to avoid that urban sprawl all the way out towards the Everglades?
Well, a few ways. One is to make
Tell them no.
Thank you. Thank you. I was thinking
really
of a nicer way of saying that.
I was going to just jump in for you.
Yes. Well, they do have to go through a process because there is an urban development boundary line that does say that there's purposes for which you can build outside and others not. So we can also, our agricultural sector, if it doesn't have a requisite preserved space, will die for lack of basically supporting the industry.
Right.
So we had an agricultural study that was finally completed, I guess now a couple of years ago, after years of it being suppressed. So I pushed for that. And it tells you this is the critical accumulation of farmland that's needed to keep that industry going, which is still considered number 2 industry here after tourism.
Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing. So yes, we can tell them no.
That's something for the listeners to know. That's pretty impressive, actually.
It is. And it diversifies. Now it's more tropical fruits, caters to different markets. But also we know that we grow things here without a lot of pesticides compared to other places. Coming in from Mexico might not have that same health factor.
Right.
So, there's different things to consider.
We're doing a lot of farm to table with the local fancy restaurants.
That's one of the ways that we protect the industry.
Yep.
We make it a local boon. And we've tried over the years different marketing techniques to bring awareness to that. But we can say no. We also can create other places to develop. But certain developers, that's not their model. Their model is take a big piece of property and do.
Well, I'm asking about going into places that are older developments near the core of 95 and, closer to 836 and, going on those areas that are central to the county and going in there and rebuilding.
Yes.
What can we do to incentivize rebuilding in these areas?
Well, some is the densification along the corridors that we've done, and that has incentivized, and people are moving there. Those are very popular destinations. The other is the building in the infill on existing property. So you could get, instead of one dwelling, you can get two dwellings on the same piece of property.
And I got to imagine the mass transit as well plays into that. The cause and effect of saying more transportation equals more viability for housing.
Yeah. It's desirable for everyone. But as far as having a large tract of land, you have to purchase over time to get something that would be at that kind of scale, I guess. But yeah, developers are doing that.
I mean, but you look at Wynwood, where my office is, for example, and you look at the good job that has been done there to put a mix of retail and entertainment, and now rental apartments for people who are younger, who want to be in the area.
Or who wear shirts that look like this. I mean, this is
well, I want you to know,
and cowboy boots.
I always wear
speaking of diversity,
an interesting shirt. And I wore this one because it reminded me of diamonds. And the reason I wore it today is because you're a diamond for our county. And I wanted you to know that I wore the diamond shirt for you.
Oh,
this is when I break the fourth wall and I just stare blankly at the camera for a couple of minutes and just let him do his routine.
Yeah.
Mayor, I can't. You raised an environmental issue, and I would be remiss
not. The new environmental issue, which is...
Well, I'd be remiss not to raise the specter of the next 30, 40 years and what we know about sea level rise, what we know about climate change. And that, South Florida, for all of its natural beauty, is also seen as one of the bellwethers as far as that's concerned in the nation. And and I'm interested in, for such a long-term issue and such a complicated one, and one that probably goes well beyond the county's scope just to solve with any combination of Band-Aids, where your current position is on that and what we're doing on a local level to just address the reality of it.
Well, and also the coordination with the Army Corps and the federal government, and what studies maybe you could tell us what studies are being undertaken to figure out whether or not we're putting floodgates or whether or not we're doing what they do in Amsterdam. How are we?
Sure.
How are we going to deal with this?
Well, first, I just want to put in perspective for me personally and my motivation. My whole career has been around affordability, making sure that people could survive and thrive and have access to opportunity. Then I became aware in my career, if you will, in my life, that people were losing trust in government. And I became highly motivated to do what I could to restore trust in government. And that was a big motivator to run for office, to try to turn that around. And the environment, I've always been an active participant in our environment. Our vacations are all in the wild. I spent 4 days crossing the Everglades in a canoe just Christmas week. And
sure, you didn't do it in the summer.
No, definitely not. No. There's plenty of mosquitoes in the winter, enough to go around.
Were there really?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
but
wow.
My point being that those are my three axes of motivation. So when it comes to the environment, that is our economy. So it's not just that it's nice, right?
Yeah, without
nice to have.
Nice to have, right? The bay needs to be clean, or we don't have recreational and fishing.
As does the ocean.
Yes. The bay, the ocean, the corals, what a disaster we're having with the heating and the disease. We have to have the fresh water, as I explained, that comes through the Everglades. And the sea is rising, and that is leading to many challenges, not just the obvious ones of flooding and it's extreme weather too. Like, okay, so now they have fires in California and we have rain bombs.
Right.
They don't even get names.
Right.
There's just rain bombs.
Hurricane decides to show up one random afternoon.
20 inches of rain in 24 hours.
So we have been extremely active in stormwater management, in changing the building code so that you can't dump water on your neighbor. You have to build in a way that absorbs water. Working across cities to coordinate, we got a 35% reduction in flood insurance because of all the resilient infrastructure work we've done as a county. Everything we can think of. That to be said, it's a global problem. The seas are rising, and particularly rising faster here because the Gulf is slowing down. So, Gulf Stream. So we have to build with the water in mind. We also have to build with heat in mind. And, we have the first in the world chief heat officer trying to protect our workforce, put more trees, make sure that, tree canopy can bring down the temperature 10 degrees in a neighborhood. So, we have cooling centers, we have a heat season. So there's many, many things that go along with being aware of the changing climate. And by the way, we say climate change here, right? There are prohibitions against using that language. We say very clearly.
We don't tiptoe on that.
We have climate change.
Yeah.
So
all you got to do is look at a king tide on Miami Beach in November, and you can see it.
So look, people want to be here. The crane is still the state bird. People are willing to pay extra to pump, elevate. The federal government the Army Corps has more projects in Miami-Dade County than any place in the country. And
Did not know that.
It's huge. They are with us all the time.
Huge.
And one is called the Back Bay Study, and it's a proposal originally the proposal was to put a big wall up out in the bay that would block the view to prevent storm surge. The focus was on storm surge, which you see the challenge of that with Hurricane Ian. Fort Myers Beach just devastated the whole place, right? So we pushed back. We didn't want a wall in the bay. And they agreed. They revisited, which is the first time I've ever heard of them reconsidering. I just want you to know I was very persuasive. So now...
We're still looking for some of those people, by the way.
So there's nature-based solutions. There's mangroves. There's debris islands. There's some gates that'll be incorporated. There's elevating some buildings. And that, again, is in the proposed budget that is being considered a first step towards making some of those things a reality. But we'll have to put some money in, too.
Yeah, I mean, look, with all the money that's coming into South Florida, and again, it's not just Miami-Dade County, it's all the way up to Palm Beach. I mean,
Florida.
Florida.
When you look at the maps, the inundation maps, it just creeps up the state.
Right. And anywhere near the coast, people want to be near the coast. That's the reality.
Yes.
So it's going to cost money. And of course, we haven't really touched on too much other than mentioning it once, the insurance problems that we're having. Are we going to end up becoming self-insured because we can't afford insurance, and insurance companies don't want to come to Florida anymore.
Yeah. So insurance, because it is a risk. And if we're building in places that are not really sustainable, then somebody has to bear that risk. And so far, flood insurance allows you to still get flood insurance, even if you're in a flood-prone area. So that's why the 35%, we really had an unprecedented improvement in our score that allowed us to get that 35% reduction.
Right. Mayor, you've been very generous with your time. As we wrap up, would love to hear from you going into this term, what you feel like your greatest accomplishment has been in your time with the county, and also where you feel like some of your greatest challenges or disappointments are.
So I was a commissioner for 6 years before I became mayor, but I didn't know everything as a commissioner that I learned as mayor. And
They took the blinders off.
Yeah, a little bit. That's right. I got to look under the covers there. And we have been focused on becoming future ready. So a lot of the things we're talking about have been the focus of tremendous energy and investment. Look at the airport. The airport has been growing
and the seaport.
Steadily.
Look at those beautiful new buildings at the seaport.
Yes.
I drive by them and they look gorgeous.
We're going to have the largest terminal of, I think, 5 ships at a time, or 3 ships at a time on one terminal.
Yeah.
And shore power. So I brought shore power so we could reduce the belching fumes from running your engines at port, and instead you plug in. So that was a big deal that I worked on for sustainability and improving air quality and noise and smut and all that.
Right.
So I would say future ready, the airport where we had to invest $9 billion to not only get ahead of the growth, but to catch up, because we had not been maintaining those elevators and escalators. They were on life support.
They didn't work.
Some of them were being fixed constantly.
Right.
And of course, then breaking down again and getting those parts. And during the pandemic and supply chain issues, really a nightmare. Well, we were a year ago at 85% of them operational at any time. Now we're at 95%, which is
great.
really good. And it's kind of an industry average, but it's still discouraging if that's the escalator that you need.
Sure, right.
Yeah, I mean, look, the airport is the
I'm trying
first
to
thing.
catch my flight.
The airport or the seaport are the first thing people see when they get to our county.
Absolutely.
And the truth of the matter is it leaves an impression, and we want to leave a good impression.
Yeah. So looking ahead, not only are we going to continue on future proofing, we're going to continue to invest in future infrastructure, fix and maintain. We're going to make sure people feel healthy and safe, and that's prevention of crime and mental health issues, which are very severe, right? People very much suffering from emotional overload. I'll put it like that. We are going to continue to focus on affordability, make sure it's an economy that works for everyone. We are going to continue to focus on our environment. We need to be resilient. We need to take care of our water and our overwater, the flooding. And maybe most importantly, we have to continue to build trust through our stewardship of public dollars, to be transparent, great customer service, show people that we are doing more with less. County government has just lost 5 constitutional offices. Right now, I'm no longer the sheriff. I'm no longer the tax collector or the election supervisor.
Right.
And property appraiser and clerk were individually led, but they were still part of government infrastructure. Those 5 offices have gone off independently. They're still drawing upon us for some of their basic services, but it's a very different structure, and we have to show everyone that we are continuing to do to steward their resources, the public's resources, wisely.
And how do you continue to make the public aware of maybe what they're not aware of, but you as mayor want them to be aware of? How
Come on, sun, sand, and soul.
That's what I was exactly going to say.
We're doing right now.
Just like we're doing now. We do our very best to put the word out. We have great media, social media connections. We're really grateful for that. And I am, as they say, everywhere.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Mayor, for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you. And it's always good to see you.
Thank you for wearing your diamond shirt.
Yeah, you're my diamond.
Thank you. Thank you so much. to both of you, and you especially for that last, but Mayor, again, for your time and for all you're doing for the county. You're listening to Sun, Sand, and Salt. I'm Josh Tomey with David Haber. Join us as always on YouTube, Spotify,
Facebook,
and your favorite, X. That's what David likes
and
to say.
Instagram. And Instagram.
And Instagram. We'll be right back. Thanks.